To go. Good afternoon. Well, that didn't go well, did it? Hello. We started 10 seconds early. If this all ends here, it's because we're likely to have sudden load shedding in South Africa tonight. It's a bit of a, it's a lucky dip of will we or won't we have power. And we've been advised half an hour ago that the power might go anytime. Hello there, Rev. So here we are. We've got Richard back. Ian's here. Hype Fighter, Louis, and another person is Shed. Shed seem to be the way forward. And well, Bruce, you just started saying there's lots of news. Which part of lots of news do you want to start with?
Well, there's so much to choose from, isn't there? There's the aircraft, the 737 that the pilot had to duck because there was a drone in the way. It was very frightening, very scaring. I guess he's suffering PSTD now, whatever that is, post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's been a lot of other stuff too. And I've forgotten it all at the moment, but I'll remember. There was that Newsy story, of course. That's interesting, isn't it? The story from Newsy about the weaponizing drones. They're going to kill us all. And I'm following up on that because they have breached their own ethics guidelines, the ethics statement, that they have failed to correct the errors. They have not responded to the notification that there are errors. They are being dishonest and disingenuous. All those things they forbid themselves from doing in their ethics document. And that's totally unacceptable. But this is where we're headed. The media is just pushing against us, and no one's pushing back. I'm the only person pushing back. It's quite disappointing. Oh, the Apple drone, isn't that lovely? Yeah, but the trouble with that is you can only fly it in a walled garden. What point is that?
In a walled garden. Ian's dropping in and out.
Sorry, I lost all sound then. I missed it.
Did you?
I had to go back and back in.
Nothing happened. Don't worry. It's not important. So yeah, this is this Apple drone idea. I don't know if it's real or not, but the actual droney part. But I think the interesting part is the fact that in the patterns they mention RID and they mention UTMs. Who's moving stuff around on the desk? Mark, hush. So it is him. See, it is him. So yeah,
I don't like it. The Apple is not illuminated. So they've killed the good of the Apple computers when they took the lighting on the Apple. So the drone does not show any lighting on the Apple, so it's no good.
But they're all about power saving now, Louis, with the new processors. It's all about doing the most with the least.
Yeah,
it is. But I think the important part of that story is the UTM and RID part of it. That's obviously the bit they're really into and won. And this week in the US, Measure and Wing are moving forward their Lank stuff. So that's the piece of the pie people are after. They don't give a hoot about the drones, just the flipping distraction. Look at this shiny drone. But we really know where the money is. That's my opinion anyway. I don't know. Anyone else want to come in on that?
I think it's too risky a market for Apple. You see all this talk of them doing this. Apple-like markets, they completely can control. And look, they don't like anything that has bad PR for 1 minute. And Apple and drones is just not a mix I ever see happening. What they like is nice, safe, comfort zone products that they can sort of carve a niche in and carve basically a large slice of.
So they're not going to get into EVs either. Self-driving EVs, they won't be there, even though it's been rumored.
Yeah, it's been rumored for years. I reckon they're interested in the software, not the cars. I think it's more about the IP and the software, not the. Why would they want to get? The car industry has typically made fairly low margins. So if we look at, it's estimated GM and Ford are somewhere between 7 and 13%. Mercedes-Benz are about 20 to 25, and Tesla are currently running at about 30%. And Tesla have really done the Apple of the car industry because what they've changed is how the dealer network works. So, for instance, when Apple started making phones, they sold them direct, and they took the network carrier originally out of the ballpark and said, we're not really worried about you guys. We're just going to do our thing, and took all of that margin away. Tesla have now done the same. Tesla's cost of sale is about 0.5 5% per vehicle compared to Mercedes-Benz, which is around 13% a vehicle, if I remember reading the numbers. So I think Tesla's done what Apple would want to do. The only thing I could see happening is if they really wanted to do it, is they could buy Tesla. That would be the logic for them.
I don't know who would buy who.
Or Tesla by Apple. Well, yes, as the world we're in today. As the value.
Tesla's a $1 trillion company now, 6th most valuable company on the face of the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it won't happen.
And there we are. And that's it. Probably.
Hope you enjoyed this treat. See us next week. For next.
No.
There we are. Of trillions and billions, we have our $1 billion UTM man, Richards.
We do, and he must be the $1 billion UTM man, because you have that. I wanted to get you on last week, but you had some feeble excuse of having to look after your child whilst your wife went out. That's just, I can't believe that. But no, congratulations on the Hyundai thing. Hyundai are the only company that I've seen so far that have put some realistic pins in the tail of the UTM or UAM, donkey, and have put it a little bit further out than everybody else. And they seem to be investing in all the right little bits here, there, and everywhere. So what can you tell us about that, if anything, Rich?
Absolutely nothing at all, Gary. No,
oh, there we are. Yes.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, you know the form.
I'll be off now, so it's great to be here.
Yeah.
No, I mean, obviously, we're extremely pleased to be working with Hyundai. I think you may have seen. I think you alluded to it there. You've seen Hyundai do lots of different things in the UAM sector over the last sort of 6 months. They've been really quite prominent. My understanding is they've been looking and engaged for a little bit longer than that as well. But certainly you would have seen recently all over the UK news was their tie-up with Urban Airports, who are the company that are looking to build a number of sort of vertiports across the UK. And then secondly, you would have seen our piece with Hyundai as well, which is really around ensuring that wherever these things go, people can freely navigate between them and do that safely and securely and in an open fashion. So that's really the piece that we're kind of bringing into the mix. And obviously the announcement here was around their consortium, which is what they're sort of convening to try and get some thought leadership into UAM, which is the piece I think that really sounds as though it's really grabbed hold of Hyundai as the future. So, we're pleased to be a part of that, to try and bring a sensible voice, I hope, a pragmatic voice to what UTM means and how that might speed up and make safer the journey to UAM.
And you say sensible voice. I know we'll take the mickey out of you, of course, momentarily. That'll happen anytime soon. But you'd expect nothing else. Aren't the voices in the UTM world going a bit nuts at the moment? Other voices. There's a lot of noise, a lot of waffle going on. What's the current state of play? Is it going to be whoever can shout the loudest at the moment is going to win?
Be interesting, I think. I agree with that sentiment entirely. And actually, you'll see a lot of content coming from Altitude Angel over the next couple of months, really trying to correct a lot of the FUD that's been put out there, a lot of the debris on the landing and the launching site. Most people are confused by what UTM is, and the majority of that is because everyone now has one, and some of the loudest companies are the ones that are really trying to lead that narrative, but are leading the majority of people to the wrong conclusion. So we'll be doing what we can to try and straighten that record and make sure that people are aware. Actually, this is the core of what UTM is. It isn't a shiny app, and it isn't this, and it isn't that. And doing what we can there to really kind of bring some attention to what actually still needs to happen, which has not changed actually in the last sort of 8 years. So that's going to be hopefully something we can help with.
And I don't know if you saw our little piece that Jonathan Rupert did for us in his site of the actual decline in numbers in America of registered airframes, a sharp decline.
Is that airframes or is it registered drone operators?
registered. It was airframes. It was airframes.
It was actually airframes, so it's not recreational, it's commercial. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
It's sharp. Or depending on how you might want to look at it, they just changed the way they added the numbers up and made it more honest. It was never what they said it was in the first place. They were always adding numbers and never taking them off if that airframe crashed or moved out of the way. So yeah, they're just being more. I'm going to mute him again. He's bloody noisy in that shit. Yeah, so I think more realistic numbers coming in. So a lot of those other UTMs are depending on the Hyperbole numbers to make their case, really. And it's just...
I think that's where there is potentially, again, that kind of common misunderstanding. I think that a UTM is really interested in the drone operator. A UTM isn't interested in the drone operator. So, having fewer drone operators, you could argue from one angle is actually a sign that things are moving towards a more kind of automated future, and therefore that's better for a UTM. Or that's one interpretation. But certainly from our perspective, we're not particularly focused on on a product that works directly with the drone operator. That, I think, is what the world really calls a UTM service provider. So those are the people who fly around on the new roads in the future, the sky roads, etc. Whereas a UTM is really focused on building those roads and helping people access them and find them, etc. Probably did a really bad job at metaphoring that for everyone there.
And just to pick up FPV's pilot about this this power station thing, which I don't think we believe was an attack, do we, gents? What did we believe that in the end? I think we think that was a rescue mission for something else, don't we? But FAA security agent, no fly zones over sensitive areas. Well, that kind of is in place. I mean, I don't know about America. Richard actually might know the answer to this, but here certainly critical infrastructure like power stations, reservoirs, and other stuff automatically has a no-fly zone over for everything. I don't know how's it happen in the rest of the world.
Hey, I just checked the FAA site, FAA by the numbers, and it says there are 865,404 drones registered, 338,000 commercial drones, 522,000 recreational drones. You don't have to register recreational drones, so how the hell do they get that figure?
Oh, numbers, just make it up.
They're just making stuff up. You recreational drone users register, but their drones themselves are not registered, so they do not know how many recreational drones there are, because a person can have one drone, they can have 100 drones, and it's not a part of the record keeping. So this whole industry is beset by misinformation and rubbish. Apart from Richard, of course, he knows it all. He's good.
But then, Richard, we'll have one metric that where you know how many people are using your system. That isn't a reflection of the total number of people out there flying, but it is a number, and it is a number that you can validate. So you must have a rough idea of how busy different places of the world are now.
Yeah, I mean, we're one small company, right, with hundreds of thousands of users, admittedly, but they're not all evenly spread throughout the world, and they're certainly not all evenly spread throughout the geographies of the world. But we don't really see a decline in the trend of people registering to access our free products like our maps. What we have seen, which was really interesting, was during the pandemic period, where initially all the lockdowns were kicking in around the world, people were just not flying. So, our flight numbers literally just dropped off a cliff. And then, more or less a couple of days after, for instance, in the UK, we announced that you could go out and exercise and you could walk and you could do all this kind of stuff. The drone flight numbers just shot back up, and then they've just continued to go up again. And now we're at, a level that we probably wouldn't have been at had things just kind of continued organically. Everyone's kind of gone mad drone flying in our system now. But I think there are a few other bits that we've done since then, particularly across Europe, where we've started deploying more of our services to airports. So we're now seeing more of the flights in and around airports, etc., that quite often we would see anyway, but now the airport's actually registering and putting through the system as well in a kind of like an official capacity. And that's been really interesting as well, to be able to have conversations with ANSPs around the world, with regulators, and say, how many flights do you think are happening at major airports? And they say none or two, because that's how many requests we've had. And then we can go and show them drone safety map, which is public, and just say, hey, so this is just what people are telling us they're doing. There's probably a lot more happening that you don't know about. So we've just seen, we have seen an increase in the number of flights, and not necessarily a commensurate increase in registered users, but more people are flying more drone flights per day, which is new to us. It's interesting.
And how much? So, have you got any numbers you can share with them? The number of flights you might see in a day around the world, then?
Around the world, on a typical day, 75,000 to 100k flights that we would see being reported. Again, just to stress for people that don't know anything about us, if you're watching, no one is required to use Altitude Angel to share a flight. Everyone can do that optionally and voluntarily. And we find that there is a huge spectrum of users on the commercial side, folks who fly for money, in other words, and then folks who fly for fun. They both use our services, but they tend to use them in a little bit of a different way. Everyone has some common ground in using our maps because they give out really good information about where you are and what's around you and where you can fly and where you can't. Recreational users tend really to submit 1 or 2 flights every now and again, or if they're on holiday, you'll see them, up in beautiful locations around the country where they'll log their flights and they'll share that with their friends. Whereas commercial users have got very clever and very innovative and have started using the public information that we share, which when you file a flight, we say to someone, hey, you can enter a public description, a public title for your flight, and we'll share that with everyone. And lots of people use that as kind of like bragging and advertising now. So they put their company name in and their web address into the title, which is quite clever. So, we've seen a very different way of doing that. And actually, I think what we're starting to see is a lot of the commercial operators are sort of networking amongst themselves and keeping an eye on who's doing more flights. And it's really quite interesting. But we're going to do some interesting, or hopefully interesting, some social features in the new year anyway, so that people can actually set up a profile and say, okay, well, I am Hype Fighter Drone Co. Limited, and I am gonna, I've got these pilots in my arsenal. I've flown this many hours, etc., etc. So people can be a little bit more braggish about what they do and how they do it.
There it is for those that don't know.
I actually won't log a flight at all unless I'm in a very heavily congested area like Birmingham. Then I might log it on Drone Assist, just for the police can look at it and go, there's someone there. Otherwise, I'll never do it. I just need the great app that Drone Assist, the Altitude Angel power. That's what I need.
Yeah, and that's like I say. I think that really emphasises the point nicely. We don't require anybody at all to, if you're going to use our apps, you don't need to log flights. It's an optional feature. What you will see over the course of the next sort of 3 to 6 months, because we're investing a very, very significant amount in redesigning those apps. And actually, at some point, we'll come back to your community, Gary, and ask if any of your commercial users and recreational drone pilots that read the content that you provide would like to participate in our user studies. But one of the things that we are going to be doing is adding more features in the app for people who share flights, because actually one of the most valuable features people have told us that they enjoy about Drone Safety Map and all of the related products that pull from it is that they can see neighboring flights reported from other people. So we obviously want to do whatever we can to continue encouraging people to do that, because obviously it does create that little bit of extra situation awareness, and it helps us to make the case that actually you can have a lot of drones that aren't in controlled airspace and they can still operate safely. And that's really important, I think, because there are still a lot of countries, a lot of territories, and even here at home, there are some voices that are pushing for segregated airspace continuously for drones, and we don't necessarily agree with that.
That is just crazy. They should go to a model flying club when you've got 10 models in the air at once in close proximity. They might actually learn something. You can fly in close proximity around, as long as you keep a visual line of sight, there's no issues. There really isn't. You can have what they will call crowded airspace quite happily, and it's perfectly safe.
Yeah, but no, it's not safe if you want to make money out of that airspace. It's the most dangerous bit of sky possible. So we can't possibly have it. Let's segregate it and let's charge people for it. That's what I
Well-
say. Come on. We
Well,
can't
to
be
be
having
honest,
free use. Come on.
This is one of the things that's kind of scary about UAMs. You know, there is a big push for urban air mobility, and these new transport UAM hubs that they want to build, that's going to create new flight restriction zones. That's going to take airspace from us because it'll probably end up being controlled. It'll probably end up with a 2-kilometer radius around it. They're going to be in cities where commercial operators are trying to work. We've been making our living for ages. We've had this access, and all of a sudden, we've now got this problem coming up.
But what's the reality of that? It's just going to turn into a heliport. It's going to be a radioed heliport, and it's
2
going to
kilometers around it. 2 kilometers
Yeah.
around it. And
But
we're
they
London
weren't-
Heliport is the perfect example. They'll charge you every time.
True. Yeah, that's true. It's yeah, what to say? I don't know. It is very much at the moment the loudest shouting are winning, but I have a feeling that players are beginning to get close to the end of their VC funding now and will be leaving the market shortly. A few of them. So I think the noise level is going to decrease, as it has done in lots of other parts of our business. And I wanted to see if we can tempt Ian into talking about the Mavic 3. We'll move away from UTMs a little bit. VC investors want an ROI. Yeah, they do. It's gone badly, this Mavic 3, isn't it?
I don't know if that's the right term to use. I would say it's not gone to plan, but I'm not sure what they expected with how much is missing. And what's interesting this week is we've now got the people who've spent their own money on this. So you've got your day one reviews where all of the guys were sent them for free. This feels different the way that's been handled, and I'm going to be a bit careful on how I say this because I've had a bit of a rant on a few things other places today as well, but I'm hearing just that the way creators are being used in this is a bit different now and things like this. For instance, the affiliate program was closed for everyone, yet it appears open for select users because people are posting DJI affiliate links. Yet those of us who were involved in it before are still not, you can't use it, it's not this. So it appears that they've opened it for a select set of people. And I can see Bruce smiling there already. Now, I have heard some whispers from others, and there's some talk of a little bit of discontent in the way people are being asked to be involved. What it appears to be the case is they're using a lot less people, and they're trying to sort of say to them they'll drive the traffic through them as well. But what must have really hurt the reviewers on this one is the aircraft was available on day one. So they've had no time to really get the views on their videos because within 24 hours, you had actual owners talking about the product, coming up with issues. And it's not that it's faulty. There's no great issues here. There is a lot missing, more than we've seen in recent times. You know, people have said, look, most DJI products come unfinished. That's a fair comment. This, though, is on another level. How much isn't there? You know,
on, Ian.
There's loads missing.
It's like the Tesla self-driving. You pay 7,500 euros now, and you'll get it when it comes.
Yeah, but that's not what was sold. That is the difference. If you look at this, everything is there on the website, and a lot of this, I'm not going to say was hidden. It's not hidden, but it was starred off. And unless you looked at it, and it's far more missing than usual. It's loads. It's loads and loads.
It's a good machine.
Yes, there's no question about that.
I don't think it is. It's more an evolution than a revolution, and people were expecting revolutions, and the revolution is not there.
But it's not just that, it's workflow. There are two guys who I know who are professionals who will not open the box because the workflow isn't going to work for them. So just take this one scenario.
I know.
Which is
Come
madness.
on. It's something that they've been missing since the Air 2, the Air 2S.
Yeah, but just this.
the
Okay, just
stupid
take this
SDK
workflow, right?
The
The
stupid
Cine
SDK
model.
is not there.
Yeah, but it's not even that. Is this worse than that? The Cine model, if you fill it with footage, you can't get that footage off until you fully recharge the battery, because it could take 40 minutes to download the full SSD.
Have
And
you
you
ever
can't
typed
power
how long it will take to download 1 terabyte of footage
Yes, but
on
it's
a USB cable?
But it's a workflow that could have been avoided if it had the removable SSD. You know, what it is it's a bunch of choices that have been made that don't work for a lot of people, and that is
Yeah,
where
no,
everyone's
yeah.
complaining. No
Come
one,
on.
if everyone
You
knew
don't
this
buy
stuff,
one, you buy 3 or 4, and
Yeah,
then you
yeah, but-
it's like charging batteries. You start unloading the footage with
Well,
one
yes.
drone, you fly with the other. Come on.
But this is stuff that wasn't mentioned in the reviews for the most part. This is stuff that wasn't talked about in all of the pre-release stuff, and it's only come to light after people have gone out and spent
Come on.
$3,000-$4,000 on the aircraft, and that's why you're starting to see a lot of not
You want
discontent.
one of these that you remove the SSD and then you plug the SSD.
But you can't do that with the aircraft. This is the problem. They've not allowed it. But yeah, you know, here's a workflow. You could fly all day. You could then, you know, fly 2 batteries. You take it back, and you can't get the data off it without waiting 90 minutes for the battery to charge, and then plugging it into the computer to offload the data.
What about having another battery charged and doing like that? Come on.
So
just
you've got to
buy a
spend
bunch of batteries.
180 quid to offload your data and leave it sitting there for offloading.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, but it's not a realistic workflow.
People are being nitty. I'm just going to the crazy details. Come on. A professional user won't have one battery. Most likely it won't have one drone. So
what you're saying to me, Louis, this is the same argument, right? Before you can fill your car with petrol, you have to keep a can of petrol in the boot to put into it, so you got enough to get to the petrol station. This is not workflow. And I'm not talking about guys who buy 10 aircraft here. We're talking about the people who are the people Richard was talking about earlier, actually. You know, most drone operators are not running 10 aircraft, 20 members of staff, and have 10 grand to spend on batteries. Most guys are single person operators, 1 or 2 person operators. And again, none of this matters. I don't care what a product does as long as you know about that before you buy it. And this is the fundamental problem we've got here again. It's not anti-DJI, it's the fact that products are being marketed with loose information, and then the reviews are glossing over all of this stuff on day one, and people are going out and buying it and going, hold on a minute, this isn't what I think. Philip Bloom, who is an extremely respected videographer, photographer, has worked for the likes of CNN, Sky News, has put quite a damning post on his Facebook page about this drone in the sense of the workflow, because it's just not realistic. So that's where we're seeing the negativity. The drone, okay, there are positives. Battery life is outstanding. The battery life is simply ridiculous. 40 minutes is too long. I flew my Mavic 2 the other day and got bored after 20. 40 minutes on a drone is just too long for most people, but it is really good. The camera is decent, but it isn't. It's the iPhone territory, as we said earlier. It is evolution, not revolution. That going from a 1-inch sensor up to a 4/3 sensor, the crop factor difference is 2.7 down to 2. It's a minuscule amount. In bright daylight, the stills will all look exactly the same.
I think the biggest problem is not having exchangeable lenses.
Yeah, because it's pointless on that sense. Yeah,
with that sensor, the goal should be having swappable lenses, because otherwise it's just a glorified Air 2.
Yeah, and you compromise that sensor by using fixed glass, because the bigger the sensor, the more playing with the optics you have to do to make it behave on such a small drone. And that's their problem. They really didn't need to do what they've gone. But look, there is a lot of good here in this product. It is going to be the best drone consumers can buy. There's no question about that. It flies really well. the two biggest complaints is how much isn't there today. That will come. But what you've done is bought the drone today, ready to get the features in January. I think they've promised January the 20 something. And the workflow Q1. Well, now I've seen a date posted. I have had a date posted, and then the workflow. But the workflow is out there now. People know about it. So that problem will solve itself. Professionals will know about it now.
I think the workflow is a false alarm, because you would adjust your existing workflow to the tool. Come on, when didn't you adjust anything when you got yourself your Inspire?
Yes,
perhaps these drones are designed for fun, not work.
Well, this is the problem. But then you balance, is that workflow worth the hassle? And that's what a lot of commercial operators are now doing. What they're looking at it at is, okay, do I change what I do? Or actually, is what I've got already a better option for me? And that is the problem. And I do think the sales on this one are going to drop very quickly, more than in the past, actually. I think that it's had this peak, but I do think it's going to fall very quickly based on how it's been perceived.
It'll fall faster than a Karma without a battery.
Now, the thing is, for instance, if you look at, for instance, the Cine version, and that's the one that I think it's the most interesting of the entire lineup, because it has the integrated SSD and it has the new remote. The new remote also has a few issues, because it's only compatible with the specific model, and no clear indication of what it could control.
And have you seen what they've done with the HDMI port, Louis? Here's another example.
Oh God, that's not the problem. Mini HDMI.
Yeah, but on the bottom of the remote as well.
And it's not very blingy, is it? There's not much gold in that. I think it should be more gold in white. It looks
lovely smooth plastic.
It's good. I can have this one on my lap.
In your lap.
And having it connected so I can record everything here.
But look, all of this is you expect a line of products to evolve for the better. I think it's fair to say when you I had the first Apple Watch.
From DJI when they killed the 100 watts batteries. Come on, are you kidding me?
I know that, but we both know that, Louis. But yeah, look, and this is where a lot of the complaints, and these aren't, this isn't me. This is feedback from hundreds of people. Now, what is interesting this time is there has become now this almost you can't talk bad about this product, because there seems to be now an army of people roaming around the internet counteracting anything that is being said on this right now. And that is in fact, there's a Facebook group where it's even been said, you can't say anything bad on this Facebook group because you'll just get jumped on.
Okay.
Now, you could argue, is that because of who it's run by? And I'm not going to go into that. However, and it isn't run by DJI, I will add. Well, not officially. Did I just say that on here?
Basically, what you're saying is that within a month, you'll get a lamp of coal on your Christmas tree.
Okay. As a user, as someone that had to consider, do I buy the Mavic 3? Okay, so I recently bought a new aircraft. Well, I didn't buy new. So I
hope you bought the Air 2S.
No, I didn't. I bought Mavic 2 Pro second-hand with 3 batteries, full fill, all the filters, Peli case, everything for £500 because it's not that the difference between the Mavic 3 is not enough to warrant the money at that kind of money. The Mavic 2 Pro price has fallen so badly because of the Mavic 3. The smart people will go, I'll have a Mavic Pro 2. I then got a smart controller. I paid £300 for a smart controller. To bear in mind, in the UK, they still go for over 500 quid from the same guy. It's going to be interesting. But the Mavic 3, if you're a pro user, not only is it the problem, as Ian has said, where you've got to have that battery to charge it up. If you're on set and you're going to go to the data wrangler, if your last shoot of the day, not only have you got that battery to charge or keep one back for it, you've then got 45 minutes to copy that data to the data wrangler. That's horrendous. You don't want to be doing that. You want to be able to take out an SSD, give it to the data wrangler. They can take it away. They'll post it back to you. That should be your workflow. The built-in SSD is probably one of the worst things about the Mavic 3. If it had been removable, it would have been really good because we could just buy them, drop them in, take them out, give them to the client, post it to me when you're doing your transfer, when you've got everything.
Aren't you describing the Plus version? What is it? Or Pro
Well,
version? What
yeah,
is it they do to it?
the Black Gold Edition Ultra, which will be in 6 months. But, what you get on this is interesting. You get the day one launch where you get the review. Well, I'll use the word reviews. You get the paid ads,
twisted much
videos, and the reviews. And there are some really good ones out there. And it is, to be fair, some of them, and actually you learn more from what wasn't said on those than was. And that's what I found more interesting than not. You then get all of the people who will love it, whatever happens. They've got money to burn in their pocket. They're not a pro operator. They'll go and blow $5,000 on something because they can. And then you get the people behind them who are, okay, is this going to bring me a benefit? And that's where we're at now. We're week 3 or 4 where the actual money is being people who are concerned about the money. And I am surprised how much negativity I've seen. The smart controller is one, which, okay, look, that was inevitable. DJI don't do backwards compatibility. We've always known that. But that should also be a hint for people. If you're going to spend £1,000 on the controller that this drone comes with, it may not work with the future model because history repeats itself. So you've got to take that. But yeah, I think it's been, okay, you can look at it 2 ways. Everyone's talking about it. Is that a good or a bad thing? The question really isn't what's wrong, is why they pushed it out so quickly. That's the question here. Why not wait
Christmas
2 more months?
Yeah, I was going to say, hashtag Christmas.
I'm not convinced you sell many of them at Christmas. Mini 1s, Mini 2s, yes. Mavics, not so sure about that. I don't know. Why was this one rushed out? Is there something going on we're missing? It feels like, they were sitting on, I suspect it's been ready a while and they're behind on the software and they were sitting on hardware and they didn't want to wait any longer. That's what I suspect it is. But again, it will be a good product. It will do more than any other drone on the market when it's finished. There's lots of things people are unhappy about. It's not just the offloading, it's the app is absolutely shocking. Frankly, the app has like a third of the functionality than the last one. So it's like buying your new iPhone and you no longer have a text app on it, or you can send text, but you can't send emojis and things like
Apple
that.
fanboys would still buy that.
But this is it. It's why is there so much not there? It doesn't make sense. And
Because
some of
it's
this is the
DJI.
way DJI operates.
They don't have to finish things. It's DJI. It's like Apple. We don't have to make a phone that works. It's look at the
But Apple
style.
do make a phone that works. That's the difference. It does work and it works well. This all stems from this constant evolution of people moving through the business, of new team, very little backwards. There's no progression. It's this team designed this product. By the time that product goes to market, they may have even left the company. Do you know what I mean? This
Hasn't everybody?
interns coming in. I heard for years the amount of interns that come into DJI is enormous. They come in, they design a product, they move on. By the time it hits the market, the guy who designed it may not even still work there. That's how fast their evolution of people is. But the problem is with that, people keep making the same mistakes. And that's where we're at today, not finished.
So this is one of the reasons why I went for a Mavic Pro 2. It's because it works. I don't have to wait for a firmware fix. I don't have to wait for a hardware fix. It's solid. It's proven. There's no bugs in it. It just works. It shoots everything I need. It takes cracking images. I've already got a Phantom 4 Pro, so it just complements the fleet nicely. The workflow between the two is good. I just don't see why people would buy a half-cooked machine. It's not worth the money. You're paying for something that doesn't work as it should do out of the box.
Hey, Mark, I've got a lovely Motorola beige brick phone if you want it. I could sell it to you cheap.
You know, and it may sound a lot of negativity here, and it isn't, because it'll still be an amazing product, but they should be better than this by now. You know, we are on the 3rd version of this product line. I haven't confirmed this because I really want to get my hands on one, because I really genuinely want to have a play with it, test it, talk about it, and try it out. I haven't been able to do it yet. I can't justify spending $2,000 on this thing right now, but is one, if it's true, and I don't know if it is, it's missing the precision landing feature. Now, this is something that made me chuckle. Every Mavic that has launched has missed this feature on day one. It's like you bought your car and the radio doesn't work for a month, and then they'll turn it on a month afterwards. And it just seems bizarre how is it we're down the 3rd version, yet this basic feature which allows it to land within a meter, not 5 meters, because reports are it's landing anywhere between 1 and 5 meters of the takeoff point, is missing on day one. And this is the 3rd time they've done this.
Don't worry, because the anti-collision is working, and
It won't hit the tree.
so you just plant a few bushes around the landing area. There's no problem about that. It will land where it should.
You know,
So I've got precision landing on everything I've got. Whether you can precision fly it again afterwards is another thing altogether. But they'll land.
It screws itself in.
big-
All this collision avoidance, and it can't avoid the planet.
Yeah,
mean, all of-
exactly. That's
and I think-
exactly right.
Yeah. And I think all of this stems down to people wouldn't mind if all of this was clear up front. And this is where all of this comes
come on.
down to.
Clearly, we are not tailored to be on the marketing department, Ian.
Yeah.
It's not our first career choice going to marketing. Come on.
If
Hey.
it worked as it should do out of the box, and the app was as good as DJI Go 4, then I can see why it's worth the money. Because don't get me wrong, it's going to be cracking. It's going to do like Ian says. It'll take stunning photos. The video will be great. It'll fly fantastic. But as it is it worth 1,800 of my pounds? No, it's not. My money is better off spent on a Mavic 2 Pro, because
Sort of thing
that.
I'd want to win in a competition, I think. But anyway,
Hey, while we've got Richard here, I want to ask a question. What is Altitude Angel going to do with remote ID information, if anything?
I'm not quite sure I understand your question, Bruce.
You've got this site. You've got sites where you're collecting all sorts of data and things, and you've got monitoring for collision avoidance. Are you going to use remote ID in those kind of situations? And if so, how are you going to use it?
So the purpose of remote ID is to enable other airspace users to see where you are and to avoid those conflicts. But there are two strands, aren't there? There's network remote ID, and there's the broadcast remote ID. We're obviously less interested in the broadcast remote ID. We're slightly more interested in the network remote ID. But the thing that we don't like about either of those two variants is that both specify that the location of the pilot also needs to be broadcast. And we don't understand or require that for ourselves. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll comply with the regulation when the regulation stipulates that it needs to be there, but that we won't share the pilot location on any of our maps. It's not relevant to us. The location of the pilot is relevant potentially to the authorities that want to know where someone is that's flying it. But again, the workloads that we're more interested in are the automated workloads where perhaps you've got one remote pilot flying 50 vehicles and that person could be in a bunker 300 miles away. So again, the remote ID element of it is kind of pointless, isn't it, to an officer standing in the field somewhere 300 miles away from the pilot. Don't really understand what the purpose of that element is. So again, for us, it's, it doesn't solve still the basic issue, which is how do I trust the remote ID that I'm seeing from someone else? It's a half-baked standard, effectively, and really, it's still not even agreeing what it is people are actually going to transmit. And okay, I'll receive a number, and that's great, but where do I look it up, and how do I trust that? How do I verify that that's come from an authority? Again, there are so many problems with it. It's basically like ADS-B again.
So at the moment, when someone uses the Altitude Angel app, are you getting GPS information from where that phone is situated?
If the person chooses to activate a flight, yes, but that's declared to that person, right? So when you submit a flight, you can just leave it at that and say I'm done, or you can come back into the app and say I'm going to fly now and I want to activate that flight. And at that moment, we will grab your GPS coordinates, even if you move around, because we're putting effectively like a virtual sphere around you, or a dome, if you will. And then we're looking for any intersecting aircraft nearby, or where we're doing that trajectory analysis and trying to work out, are they going to collide with you or your drone? So yes, we do know where you are at that point, yeah.
So how big is this dome around me or the aircraft then?
Well, it depends on what you tell us you're flying, for a start. And it depends also on the quality of the data that we have in terms of the connection to you at the time, and also the coverage of the data that we have in the area. So, for example, if you want a really high latency network link to Altitude Angel, and you're in an area where we have very little coverage, we would be looking at least 150 kilometers away from you as a kind of radial point for what's happening. Because again, what's important to us is something that's moving really, really fast. Distance is time, isn't it? Really, if you see what I mean, it's important for us to be able to look further away. Whereas if you're on a super duper 4G link or Wi-Fi or something like that, we're in an area where we have really high coverage. We might be looking as little as 30 kilometers away from you for intersecting flight paths.
So did you see that Ofcom in the UK turn around and says there's a few places in the UK, quite a few actually, where telephone boxes cannot be removed because there's no decent mobile signal?
Yes, I've seen those. Yeah.
So already it would show that any kind of remote ID by telecoms in any kind of format, that's just a no-go from the start. That just shows that is not the way to go.
Maybe you can access it through the phone box.
I love that idea. Plug your drone in. Well, actually, Mark, sorry, just to come back on that, I don't agree that those two things are sort of cause and effect there. They don't follow, because there are very few locations by square meterage of the UK that are required to do that. And I know specifically for a fact that there is a requirement for that to go in the next 3 years. So that will be ubiquitous coverage in the UK at least.
Right. Okay. I go to loads of places where I just can't get a signal anyway.
Yeah, well, there's a difference between getting a signal that you can make a call with and getting a signal that you can send a message on or call the emergency services on, right? So the service is different to the signal.
I can't get nothing. You couldn't even do 999 off the places I fly.
You need to put a SIM card in, Mark. Don't be cheap.
Oh, damn it!
That was switched off, I think. So that's a good point. Signal isn't ubiquitous, but again, when it comes down to this type of workload, with the types of customers that we work with, the UAM companies, the folks who are thinking about doing 200-mile long, motorway inspections, their airframes aren't going to rely purely on cellular, and nor should they, right? So they'll have satellite backup. You would have seen that we did the partnership with Inmarsat, for instance. That's there to allow the vehicle to select the telemetry channel that's going to work for it based on where it is, and actually also for the UTM to be able to say, just to give you a heads up, a mile out, you're going to lose cellular connectivity based on our coverage maps. You need to start transitioning to satellite. So there are these mechanisms coming in to help mitigate the poor cellular signal. But for the majority of cases, in the majority of time, in the majority of urban locations, for the majority of pilots, cellular is great.
No, I have to pay to use to sell your data, and I don't want to.
That's selling the data that comes in. Peppermint Pilot asks, well, what do you do with that data post-flight? I bet he sells it to every supermarket in the world or something like that.
Yeah, Lidl's are our biggest customer for that information. No, that's a good point. So we will keep your flight data. So the flight declaration that you made. So I'm in this location at this time for as long as you ask us to. So if you ask us to delete that, we'll just remove it straight away. One of the interesting things that we're trying to challenge at the moment and trying to understand is where a person has a right under the GDPR to come back to us and say, well, we have a right to delete our data. We'd like to be forgotten, please. But we might know, for instance, that you've been involved in an accident, because there is an exemption on the GDPR for right to be forgotten if we know that a crime has been committed, for instance. And we're trying to work out at the moment to what extent should a UTM company actually be able to fulfill that kind of request.
But then
And
again,
what if a person knows that they've flown
Yeah.
into a restricted zone and then comes to us and says, I want to delete it? You know, what if they get there before the police? Is that okay? You know, there are a million different variables that are really interesting to look at that one. But what I will say, because I think Peppermint Pilot's question is really valid, I think we are perhaps significant by a wide margin in our protection of customer data and user data. They're very, very important to us, and we don't sell the flight data that we get.
But then, Richard, you know, what you said about that user data. So you wouldn't know that person's done something wrong without physically checking that data first. So, for instance,
Come on, everyone's had a speeding ticket. It's a gaping hole in
Well,
the GDPR.
but you know, you can say, Richard, you know, you said you can set a predetermined time before that data goes. So you might have it set to 30 days as a user, for instance. And you decide on one occasion that data is to go in under 30 days, and you think on day one, oh, I want that gone. You know, your choice as a business is either do you then have to look at that data before getting rid of it, or do you have a blanket in place? We carry all data. We will remove it from your account, but there will be a 30-day, well, let's call it a safe that it falls into should law enforcement contact us.
There are all sorts of, it's not an exemption, but there are all sorts of provisions within the regulation for, you know, what's reasonable given the circumstances, what's reasonable given the size of company, what's reasonable given the size of the request, and what checks have we done, etc., etc. So what I'm saying there is it's not necessarily, you know, straight black and white. I mean, again, to be clear, today, when we're given a request, we action the request within 24 hours, most cases, sometimes 48, and that data is gone. What we will do, as I've said, and actually it's explained on our page when you go to delete it anyway, what we then do is if you've submitted flight information to us, we anonymize the flight information so we could never tie it back to a person, but we retain the record that show that a flight took place in a location. But at that point, we have no technical ability whatsoever to ever go back and say, well, that belonged to Ian, for instance.
Yeah.
What we could do is resolve that back to a completely anonymous random identifier that, because we've blown the records away at that point. So I just think it's really interesting, because if you fast forward 10 years where you've got potentially hundreds of thousands of drones and UAM all moving around, and the UTM is, you know, is a trusted provider of safety information, and then you get a request to delete something, what do you do with that? You know, do you, like you say, do you put it into a kind of like a moratorium? You say, okay, well, we'll request it and we'll queue it for deletion in 30 days, or not. So it's a really interesting point.
We already have hundreds of thousands. Well, we have thousands of drones flying all the time now. I mean, there's 300,000 in the UK. How many minutes was it in the USA? How many minutes were flown in a year? Do you remember? 82 million or something? That's a lot.
All the minutes.
It's a lot of drones.
Hey, Richard has already going to my aircraft. The standard says no. I mean, technically, there's nothing to stop someone acting like a UTM, receiving all the remote ID data and then rebroadcasting out over aviation frequencies, other than licensing and equipment compatibility. I think one of the challenges that we've overcome before is we've done something like that. We did that in 2018 with Operation Zenith, if you guys remember that. But we took, for instance, before it was called remote ID, from a standard perspective, we took all of the identity of the drones participating in our system, and then we took an anonymous part, which was randomly assigned to each of the drones as they took off, and then we rebroadcasted that out as an ADS-B target in the local vicinity, and that allowed I think it was the Manchester Police air helicopter could actually then see the drones that were participating in our network. And the final piece to the resistance there was to say, okay, well, we've got a drone that isn't participating in our network, so they're not connected to us. They're pretending to be a rogue, but they have flown in front of one of our counter-UAS systems that are connected, and we will then present that back out onto ADS-B as well. So it's possible, but in the implementation at the moment, the answer to that, I'm afraid, is no. It's going to do very little for that.
Yeah, which is why electronic conspicuousy is the way forward, and that should be for all aircraft, and remote ID should be thrown into the bin where it belongs.
It's interesting though. How long before we see something the equivalent of Flight Radar 24 set up by the Karens of the world, so you can see every drone pilot where they're standing all over the
By
world? 'Cause
us?
anyone with a
No, by
smartphone.
us. We're going to make the money out of it.
Oh yeah. Put a smartphone in your pocket. You can be reading all those remote ID signals and going through 3G back to the central server. It's going to be a disaster, isn't it?
Yeah, because remote ID is the worst idea going. It needs to be electronic conspicuousy, because these new urban air mobility that's coming, so it should be mandated from day one. All those aircraft should have some sort of transponder on them, regardless. So they should already have sussed this out. This should have been all sussed and done.
But why don't we say, hang on, stop the clock, let's all have a good think about this and implement modern digital standards that make sense, instead of just rushing from one vendor to the next who says, I've invented a thing, they use my thing, and then like, no, use my thing. And
Can't get more digital than Morse code, mate.
You can't get more, exactly. You cannot get more digital than Morse code. So, yeah, it's just a Horlicks, and we should be thinking about the sky in 20 years' time, not
where everything's
not just
powered by fusion.
Yes, yeah, it is going to be that sort of thing. It's just going to be interesting, really, that Richard has to go on.
Electronic conspicuocy would be the thing to choose. So you would say by 2030,
which one? What sort? How are we going to do it?
It'll be broadcast.
Someone has to set the standard. They just have to go, right, this is how we're doing it. Job's done. 2030, anything in the sky that's man-made, be it a drone, be it a microlight, be it paramotor, don't care what it is, urban air mobility, everything should have a electronic conspicuous transponder. RID is then pointless and is a waste of time to develop it, because it just got replaced by one system.
So now even every bird must have the remote ID.
I said man-made.
Louis, I said man-made.
But there's pigeon fanciers. Do they count?
SpaceX and everything like that.
That's like the pilot,
So
the pigeon fancier.
So microlights, paramotors, be it a Cessna, be it a helicopter, all should have electronic conspicuousy, and drone should, and it should be built in. So RID is the problem. So RID shouldn't be developed. Elon Musk says you should never develop something for the sake of it. So, if you was to look at Six Lima and its processes and how you would develop things, you would actually go remote ID. No, we would go straight to electronic conspic, because that is the way you would go. So even Six Lima, if you did the processes, you would just go, no, RID is actually pointless.
People are dying. Oh, go, Richard.
No, sorry. I was going to say I'm not entirely sure I follow that, because electronic conspicuity, as you pointed out in the chat, there is principally a term that's banded around and aimed mainly at GA, right? And
it's aimed at everything.
Well, anything that's not a drone, right?
No, it's including drones. It's in Cap 72. It is actually mentioned in Cap 72 for drones. Just so you're aware.
Sorry, RID is what you're referring to as being applicable only to drones, and then e-conspicuity to everything. Yeah. The method is kind of irrelevant, but both of those mandate that the vehicle is given an identifier, and that's the concept, which is not different between either of those things.
But it's in what they pump out.
No, so they both pop out an identifier, and both identifiers are supposed to be cross-checkable with a central source.
Yes.
The problem is in the e-conspicuity version, which is why I'm not agreeing with you, of that, it is severely more constrained than the limits set under remote ID. But the implementation of remote ID is very, very flawed. So I'm just trying to separate the overall task here that both communities are trying to solve is that things that fly through the air that are man-made are identifiable, right?
Which EC would do for everything.
Which remote ID does, right?
Remote ID only does it for drones. And I think of all aircraft. So in my head, safety and manned aviation kick off about safety all the time. It has to be for everything. A RID never goes into an aircraft. It never goes into a Cessna. It never goes into a microlight. It doesn't. So if we're talking about electronic on SPIC, it should be for, that's why I say everything. Remote ID is always aimed directly at drones. Remote ID is never designed or never stated it's going into a helicopter. It's never going into that Cessna over there. You know, it could be a nice little simple unit that could go on into everything.
Yeah.
That's what it should be, and that's electronic conspic. And it also means we can get rid of the need to know where the pilot is, because all we care about actually is where the aircraft is. Because if everything's in the sky and bipping out, I'm here and I'm on 365 or heading 360, and I'm traveling at this speed and I'm at 600 feet above the surface, that's all you need to know. And then all you need is your software to go, right, this vehicle's tracking this way at this height, this one's tracking this way at this height. Both of you can be told at the same time, look, you're on a collision course. If you lower or higher, you go low, you go high, then the problem can be avoided.
Well, hang on. So you've just conflated conspicuity and navigation, which are different things. Conflict resolution.
I think it would be UTM telling them, you know, to take the avoiding action.
But again, I think it just comes back to, I agree with the principle, right? Everything should be identifiable, but it's what you do with that ID and how useful and how trustworthy it is. But your proposition for e-conspicuity, which is typically aimed, or it's come from the aviation community as a proposition for everything, it is much more constrained in its use, in its ubiquity than remote ID is trying to be. And to clarify for everyone who can't see the private chat, Mark, you're talking about remote ID, capital R ID, as in the standard that's been proposed, and I'm talking about the concept of having a remote identifier, which is slightly different, right? Both move towards having a degree of visibility. The second part, I just want to come back on, because we represent a lot of people who are in the security services or in tasked with other sort of airspace security activities. And they would argue, I'm not saying I agree with it, but they would argue that it is a very important thing for them to know where the remote pilot is located. So I understand how it's ended up in the spec, but as I say, I think the way it's implemented and proposed in the spec means that it's easy for anybody to find the remote pilot, and that does create another security problem, right? And
do taxis in the UK have any kind of GPS tracking device in them? Do you know? They don't. So they should have, after that thing on Remembrance Day, they should put remote ID to taxis so where they can be held accountable.
Yes. If these security people, Richard, you know, how many people have been killed by a multi-rotor? You know,
so let me take a step back. That's not a debate I'm going to have, because you know my own personal feelings on that anyway. But that doesn't change the fact that if you want to get to an airspace which is busier than the one that it is now, that includes potentially hundreds of thousands of remote vehicles, there will be new problems, right? And in that new environment, the security landscape is very nerve-wracking for a lot of people that don't understand the technology. For a lot of people that do, it's still nerve-wracking. But actually, just the simple act of getting around up there will be very different to it is today. So we need some way of electronically being able to identify people that are obeying rules, right? Because 99% of people will obey a rule. They'll put a license plate on their drone or whatever it's going to be. And actually, a lot of people won't. And those people that don't might be doing it because they're deliberately not doing it. They might be doing it because they're just willful and abstinent, hype fighter maybe. Or they might be doing it because they're nasty people and they want to do harm. But either way, you need some way to identify, you know, the 99 percentile of traffic up there. And I agree, it should be something which is accessible to everyone. And again, this is, if you go and have a chat with virtually all of the GA community globally, they're very upset about the notion that these drone users, quote unquote, are forcing them to have to do something they've never had to do, which is carry a transponder. They don't like that.
I just have a little cry.
We're being forced to do by the regulator.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. I'm just saying that today there is even an incentive scheme that the Civil Aviation Authority run where they will subsidise the cost of a transponder for GA Pilot.
They
Now,
do the
I think
same
that's a
here.
little crazy if I'm honest, because I'm thinking to myself, well, if I can afford to run a plane, I'm pretty sure I can fork out 400 quid, and I'm going to get 50% of it back. But on the other hand, I often think that there is this disconnect, because actually in the UTM world and in the drone world, we're expected to have like 1 million times more capabilities and standards imposed than you'll often find on other users in the airspace. And remote ID there is an example I think we can both agree on, right? There is this expectation that every drone, everywhere, all of the time, should be trackable, traceable, that the pilot should. But we're quite happy to let someone bimble around in a Cessna where that isn't the case. And that just surprises me. I'm not suggesting from a policy perspective that's right or wrong. I'm simply saying from a safety perspective, looking at system design, I wouldn't design a system in that way.
But it's not about safety anymore, is it? I mean, the data proves it's not about safety. We don't have a safety problem with drones. No one has ever died as a result of the recreational use of multi-rotor drones. Yet every day people are dying in manned aviation crashes. The guy that went into space with William Shatner got killed in the 172 crash last week or this week. That's how bad things are. Everyone knows someone that's been killed in an aircraft crash. And so is the airspace from a drone perspective going to be sectionalized like it is for manned aviation? Should I need remote ID if I'm flying in the equivalent of Class G airspace well away from the congested areas? Or should it be everybody everywhere, in which case it should apply to all aircraft at all times?
These are questions we ask as often as we can, Bruce, especially in the commission. We work in different territories as well, trying to work out, what do you want to do with it? Even if there was that system, why do you care that little Timmy has just unpacked his Mavic Pro 3, of course, and he's flying it in his garden 200 miles from the nearest city? You don't care about that. But if you're a commercial user maybe, and you want to fly around Heathrow, and you want to be flying something that's 200 meters wide or whatever, it's enormous, carrying 300 people, then probably the risk is a lot higher. Probably the benefit is a lot higher for everyone else being able to see you. So I agree. I do think that there is this strange notion that if it flies, it should be tracked.
I think you've identified the real root of the thing here. Nobody should care from a safety perspective, but it's no longer about safety. It's about security and control. And that's the problem. We're trying to mix the two things. Safety is a totally different thing to security and control. There's an area of overlap, but the objectives and the methodology used to achieve each is different. And if you try and make them one and the same, you end up with the giant mess we have now in terms of regulatory frameworks.
I think that's a really good point. And anyone I think that studies security, particularly on a technical perspective, will probably agree that having a total surveillance picture isn't necessarily useful, right? Because what you care about are the areas that you care about, and you start there. That's where you want to manage your risk, right? So if you decide that that's airports and nuclear power stations and reservoirs, then that is where you focus your regulatory instruments. That is where you focus your technical detections and countermeasures. The rest of it, you don't really worry about, because you don't really worry about it today. So having more data doesn't equals more safety. It doesn't equal more security. You just need to get focused.
Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite, in fact, because the real data gets lost in the noise. And the problem we've got is that we still haven't seen anything that justifies the paranoia. I mean, where are the risks to security? Where are the risks to safety? We've seen no incidents that say this is a problem that needs to be addressed. It's the security safety companies saying, you need us because there is a perceived risk and we must address this. There's still no risk assessment. We've heard about, drones can hack into infrastructure and do this, that, and the other.
It's a perceived notion. It's a perception, because the perception of the security people is that it's quite easy to put something on a commercial off-the-shelf drone and do bad things with it. It's a real perception.
It's easier to use a taxi.
Oh, steady, yeah.
Well, it's an interesting point, right? And I think the real information is that the risk is not well quantified, but the fear is very well quantifiable, right? Like and what's driving a lot of the investment, and therefore a lot of the attention that people can buy with that investment, is fear, right? And fear is a really powerful motivator, right? So I think that's a really interesting point, because I think, as far as I'm aware, I don't think anyone has been killed as a result of recreational drones. I mean, it stands to reason. I think it's a horrible thing to say, but I think it stands to reason at some point it's likely to occur. But the reality is, Is it going to be more or less damaging than, any one of the number of, I think it's hundreds of aircraft incidents that occur a year? I also think it's really strange that we have to have this policy of, for example, for small drones, we have to make sure that they hit 100% of nothing 100% of the time. Yet it's coming to have, 150,000 road traffic collisions annually, many of which are resulting in fatalities. So I don't think it is fair to say it is just a question of risk, because it doesn't seem like it is. It seems like something else is driving it. But
That's
again,
the thing that
maybe these people are seeing something we don't see. Maybe
it's the dishonesty though.
that.
It's hard to carry their favour and to gain credibility with the community when you lie to them. You tell them, oh, it's all about safety, when they know it's not. How do you get the respect of that community? And if you don't have respect, you don't have compliance. So all your rules and regulations are worthless if you don't have the respect and compliance of the people you're trying to regulate. I don't know, are the regulators just so stupid they can't see this? Just be honest and say, well, we know it's not about safety, but this is what we want to do. Get that dialogue going, get that connection. They're completely alienating the whole community.
But are we not forgetting the whole RID thing came up from another UTN company that bought a radio company to make little devices to broadcast data. If we wind the clock back, I want to say 7-8 years, that's where this all came from. I can point exactly at where this idea, it's Ian's fault and he's asleep. I can point exactly where this idea came from. And it's just everyone else has picked, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, yeah, no, we can make those as well.
There's a chance to make some money.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting concept, right? Because there is, I think, going back particularly 8 years, but even more so even today, drones represent to a lot of companies, or especially a lot of companies that are just starting, infinite cash if you can only solve some of these pesky problems, right? And therefore,
PV loss, Ray.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to go and speak to an investor, it's a great story to be able to say, well, we're going to issue all the license plates for N number of infinite drones in the future, because that sounds like a really investable proposition, right? But it's an interesting concept, but I don't think remote ID will really get, as in the standard as it's proposed, will really gain a lot of traction, because it will come across companies like us to have to implement it. And the moment it gets implemented, it will fall down because it won't fulfill what people need. It will probably get struck off for all sorts of privacy concerns. There will be one legal challenge for the privacy aspects, and it will probably crumble. It isn't a good standard, in my view. There are better concepts, and even the concepts that probably other UTM companies are doing as well right now, where they can identify their own pilots and they can share that if they choose. That's probably a better system than the internationally standardized remote ID system that's been proposed. It seems very strange that that's getting a lot of traction. But what I can say is, against all the UTM companies I frequently network with, none of them have implemented it, and none of them have plans to yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting.
Gary, did you see the link I sent? Speaking of aviation hype and things that collapse and fall apart, I sent Gary an interesting link. You might want to post it, Gary.
I will. It's ready to go. And usually it's ready to go. I just want to ask Richard one more thing, and because back to the point of the anonymized flight data, and I also wanted to sort of put a point to this as well. I'm guessing it's so you can identify the pinch points and where airspace is frequently encroached. Then you would have a fair idea of areas you might want to say to the regulator you want to look at that or whatever. But yeah, why might you keep anonymized data? And what
we do quite a lot with that, and I think that is a really good question. I think it's a really valid question as well, because even the anonymous data, we want to have a purpose for keeping it, because frankly it costs us to keep the data as well, right? Like, it's not free to store all this stuff. So the first thing that we're able to do is we're able to compile models over the UK, over different countries. Not that kind of model, but that's an interesting anti-drone system. I've seen eagles, but not. I think that's a fox or a wolf. Going back to the UK, where we've just been experimenting with some new visualizations, it's really useful for us to be able to say, well, over a typical year, this is what the seasonality looks like for drone flights at, say, Brighton Pier or at Heathrow Airport, and then to be able to work out what kind of locations people are trying to fly in, to be able to correlate that with information about cellular coverage, for instance. Do we see a lot of people trying to fly in an area where there's no cellular coverage? Do we see a lot of people trying to fly in an area where it's 5G? And we can do a lot with that information then to be able to sit down with folks at airports, for instance, who are terrified about the risk of drones and trying to ban them all, and then to turn around and say, well, actually, here's what we can see as your quantifiable risk. All of these flights seem to have taken place without any incident to your facility. Why don't you actually, instead of banning these flights, try and engage with that community? And we have some tools that can help you do that. So again, it's not about bringing the identity into it, just the assertion that at a particular point in time, someone did a thing with a drone in that location, and that's really useful information for us. And the second part is we'll give that data to any regulator that has a genuine interest in quantifying the risk. Now, I've chosen my words very carefully there, because many regulators have asked us for it, but none have shown a genuine interest in using it to quantify risk. Because a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, that'd be really good. Send me a copy of that. I'm like, well, why do you want it? What are you going to do with that information? Right? We've been collecting that for 6.5 years. What are you going to do with it? And how is that going to benefit drone users? How is that going to benefit aviation? And actually, we still haven't found a single aviation authority globally that has put any resources behind actually wanting to look through that data properly. And there are probably near on something in the order of between 1 and 1.2 million flights that we would have archived in that time frame. So it's a really interesting data set. And I think it's probably only a small part of the community, right? It's probably not even, let's say, it's probably not even 10% of all of the flights that are happening globally. But it's a data set that you think regulators would jump at, because it is validated and it is proven. So we just don't see that type of request coming through. You know,
They don't want to quantify the risk, because it would betray the arguments that this is about safety. The risks are so low that if you actually quantify them, you'd have no justification for the regulatory overreach you engage in.
I mean, I guess there was that notion, isn't there? There's that implication I think someone made on the call earlier that, you know, this is not actually about safety. It's about something more nefarious, probably about security. I also, and I'm not singling out any authority here, but I also wonder if it's a level of incompetence, but from the point of view that they've been handed a problem and told to solve it, right? And they've also at the same time been handed no extra resources. They've got no technical knowledge on it, and it's become political. So in that kind of situation, you know, you're going to scramble, you're going to clutch at straws, and you're going to probably bend a little bit to the political pressure that's there. And we've all seen that, right? We've seen the incidents. You saw what happened, you know, certainly in the UK when Panorama, I think it was, who we still went after, and we're still very, very displeased. I've uninstalled BBC News following that. I've never looked at it again on my
Don't pay your license. Don't pay your license.
I'm required to if I ever look at anything that's broadcast live, like YouTube or this other platform that might be out there. But anyway, we can digress a little bit. But, you know, ultimately, I wonder if there is just that. You know, I'd like to think that there's some grand plan, but I actually don't think that there is this grand joint up plan. I think it's just a bunch of people struggling to make sense of a situation with a bucket load of political pressure, a bucket load of fear, and like two people running around for a country trying to sort it all out. I think that's probably the sad state of it, to be honest.
You did, right, because if you look around the world, we've got the FAA was told you must implement remote ID. The politicians told them to do it. It wasn't a decision made by the FAA. It was a political diktat from above. And in New Zealand, we've got the same politician saying you must implement registration to the Department of Transport, which is then passed it on to CAA. So these things are being driven from a much higher level than a regulatory perspective. And again, as you say, it's because of fear and doubt, and that's due to the hysteria that's been created by people who don't know anything but claim they do, and they want to sell their products. So we're really from a safety perspective, this is a very dangerous bit of ground to be treading, because we're fooling ourselves into thinking the things we're doing are going to make the place safe, but they're not. They're making it less safe in many cases.
I think that's the interesting part. I think most people that I've spoken to in the drone community are willing to follow rules and regulations if the reasons are clear and they can understand them first and foremost, but actually they can understand the impact and the good it's going to do. And when it comes to something like the ask behind remote ID, as in capital R, capital ID, most people are just kind of like confused. Like we can all see that the ask of the regulator there isn't really going to solve that problem, and we can all see the other problems that are going to come as a result of that. Yet everyone's still being asked to comply, and in most democracies around the world, you police through consent. So most people are kind of looking at this going, what Like, okay, I mean, I register my car and I get used to that. And like, yes, fine, I have other identifiers that, you know, my driving license, but there are processes that guard who can get that. You know, I don't walk around in the street broadcasting my passport number to other people and my current location to people nearby. But that's what we're asking drone pilots to do. And there isn't even in the standard, for instance. We lobbied for this when we saw the standard was being railroaded. We said, why isn't it random identifiers that change either on some specific time period or every time the drone hits the ground? You know, when the drone lands, give it a new ID, give the pilot a new ID, because at least then you can't track the same ID over a journey, for instance, and find the person. And you see this, you know, Apple did this recently with their AirTags that can be used to track people. And you've seen, if you followed that closely, because it's very similar to remote ID, if you follow that closely, you've seen it backtracked and backtracked and backtracked, and then they've changed that implementation now. So it's virtually useless as a tracking mechanism. Really good if you want to find your lost keys, but useless as a way to stalk people. And I think that there could be a lot learned there from...
Have they, as an aside, have they switched off the location sharing of other Apple devices? You know, you might opt out of having your location being shared between a device, but Apple devices rebroadcast any other Apple devices they
make a
see
mesh network.
nearby.
Yeah. I had one of those
Very,
Apple
very
AirTags,
clever.
but I lost it.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that one.
Yeah, no, just they're very well. And the reason I say that is they're very keen on UTMs all of a sudden with patents for data gathering, etc., etc., etc. Are they going to build a drone? No, they're not. Are they going to want that data? Yeah, probably.
So basically, what we said at the beginning of the broadcast about the Apple drone might be more related to this.
Yeah, I absolutely think so, and I absolutely think it's
And
probably.
by the way,
more...
I'm using this on some of the drones because it makes sense.
You should just land closer, Louis.
Yes.
Yeah, Bruce.
But
I'm still young. I can still see far enough away to locate it.
well, we mentioned the idea of having networks of our Karen network of receiving stations to make our little map for whatever. Well, that's exactly what Apple can do if they put in a patent that they're going to listen for our RID signals, and their patent says only they're allowed to do it. They've got all those iPhone users all around the world creating that mesh network for them. Ding dong, here we go.
And
Go on,
speaking of those, that what you know, as Richard was saying about when you register your vehicle, you pay your road tax and things, you're getting something back. You're getting something for your money. But in Australia, it looks like the fee per drone could be as much as $40 to register, and you're getting nothing back for that. There's no prescribed flying areas they're going to set up for you. There's no benefits to you apart from not being fined if you get caught without paying the tax.
You get the
It's ridiculous.
satisfaction of being compliant with the law and helping all the other drone users to be compliant with the law. Come on.
I think that's an interesting concept, isn't it? Being asked to pay for something where you get nothing back, because even you have to pay road tax, but you get something back for that, right? You have, well, hopefully you get all your potholes repaired, but ultimately you get a safe network to drive on, you get well-maintained roads, you get signage, etc., etc., etc. You get standards, but with an imposed registration, what do you get? That's what I've always questioned. You know, sometimes you don't actually even get useful maps from the authority, right?
I get nothing for my operator ID. I get nothing for my UKCA operator ID, which I didn't need for 20 odd years to fly model aircraft perfectly safely in, you know, a model flying site that they would never know about, and use airspace that's perfectly fine and safe. I pay £9 a year to keep doing the same thing. It is one of the worst jokes on the community going. You know, because it brings nothing to the work. It brings nothing to us at all. That £9 does nothing for drone safety at all. It does nothing at all.
No, right.
And
But
you're
anyway,
stupid
meanwhile,
When does a model aircraft equal a drone? Interesting question, Richard. Interesting question.
it's not interesting. They're one and the same. It's not.
Yeah, because they're now
That's-
all remotely piloted aircraft systems. So
And
drone,
that's why I'm joining the deck. I'm going to be on the deck. I'll sort this out. Don't you worry. They've called me. You saw on Twitter. They called me to come along and be part of it. Well, anyone, but I'm going to apply.
Meanwhile, in New Zealand, you can buy this. Who wants a jetpack? Oh, reserve met 35,900. This is I forgot what they're called now.
Martin Jetpack.
Martin Jetpack, of course.
New
Their
Zealand
auction
Jet.
ends on the 22nd.
That's Bruce, right? Are you selling this, Bruce?
Bruce's fault.
Right from the get-go, I said this was a complete and utter waste of time. The taxpayers put $1 million into this thing, and I said, "Why are you wasting my money?" But no, the government knows what it's doing. They know how to pick losers, and there's so much kit there. We see where the money went. It's incredible, and of course, it can be yours. You can. The best bargains, if you look, is about page 30 onwards, because there's about 40 pages of things, and people have bet on the early ones. So all the prices have been bid up, but people haven't bothered going to the end. So if you go right to the end, that's where people haven't bothered going. So there's still really low reserves on it.
Over here. All right.
And you can buy a copy of the CAA rulebook. Yep. You can buy a copy of the CAA rulebook for $1. That's a fantastic bargain.
Look at that. Time magazine. Yeah, you're right. People aren't going to the end. Let's go back page 38. Let's see what we can buy there. Those $1.50 for those servos.
Those big high quality digital Metal Gear servos.
Yeah. Look, those high tech $25. Get a nice T-shirt. So there we are.
Swimming pool there. How much was the swimming pool?
Epoxy paint. Rated number 1 on Hello Peter. Oh my word. Yeah. Oh, that's expensive. That Volt servo. Oh, not Volts or Vols? There's Vols, not Volts.
Yeah.
Those are expensive.
Yeah, but look how much that one is.
Yeah, those are expensive.
So I reckon if someone's got a bit of money in their pocket, you could buy a lot of this stuff and make a huge amount of money over it, as long as you're prepared to sit on it and sell it over time.
Yeah.
And it says reserve met for that servo. Wow.
Yeah, because they have the reserve price as the starting bid price, so all the reserves are met.
Oh, here they are. Look, there's more. These are earlier page, so they're $2. Those are more than $2. 14 spark plugs for $2. Goodness me. So what are you going to? Well, we should all be sending cash to Bruce to buy his stuff. Ends on the 22nd. Just send it to Bruce Simpson's hangar. What do you want in there, Bruce?
Oh, there was some nice test gear actually, but that was early on and it got bid to stupid prices. But there's you get aviation band radios for $35 and all sorts of stuff, which is really, handheld av band radios, which is good deals. So, and of course, these are the current bids. They'll go up again as people start bidding. But I think there'll be some really good bargains, because so many of the same things they've got so much of them that people will buy what they want, and there'll still be stuff left that people won't bid on.
Oh, those are quite cool. Those data loggers. Wow! What a job to go in and take photos of all these things and catalog it all. And goodness me,
and these people were creating a jetpack. They had a couple of prototypes. Why did they need all this gear? How much money? That's the trouble. If you throw venture capital at a company that's promising the earth, they just buy all sorts of cool toys and plays with them until they go bankrupt.
Well, look at the pallet jack, 225. That's on page 1. And the GoPro, 285.
Yeah, silly prices at page 1.
Yeah. Wow, what a thing! And what is this hit the news in New Zealand, or is it?
No,
just,
it's had a couple of small mentions, but it's not very well known. It's not easy to find this page. It doesn't show up on the main auction site, so you've got to be in the know, I think, to get access to this page. So now you are in the know. You're a privileged person.
I'm going to put it in the comments.
Yeah,
hopefully it will get there for the peoples. There we are, the peoples. If you wish,
because when they went public, I issued a public warning: do not invest in this company. It's going to crash and burn anytime. And people invested, mum and pop investors, individuals invested thousands in this thing. And I was pulling my hair out. What are you doing? You're going to lose your money, and they did.
Yeah, I see it's posted on YouTube, but it's not posted on Facebook. If you are watching there.
Maybe Facebook filters that so that their Facebook marketplace isn't affected.
Absolutely. That's definitely lootly. So I'll try and post it elsewhere if I can. So where are we at now? Hour and a half, and we have certainly been talking lots of nonsense. Have we seen any other news? And hello, Nicola. I see you there now in person. Have we seen what other news has crossed our bows this week? Going once. going twice. No other news. Well, in
Hasn't
that
been a
case-
lot, has there? It's been
Oh, it's been dear old delivery drones again. They're just
Yeah.
leading the way all day long. Keep going. And DJI things that don't work. That's been about it, really, isn't it? Definitely, yeah.
And the
Everyone's
crazy
going,
media with their freaky hysteria stories.
Yeah. All right, then. In that case, this is definitely time for me to say, going once, going twice. That's it. Dear viewer, wherever in the world, inability to speak, wherever you might be in the
Read
world,
from the
I hope
script.
yourself. Read from the script, yeah. Look after yourself. Oh, look out! He's here. iForce 2D. It's time to go. Right, he's here. We're going. I hope you are. I hope you're choosing wisely from that auction. And Peppermint Pilot's asking what's Nicola up to these days. He's reviewing tiny models.
Not yet. In a bit. Like already mentioned in my previous video, or actually 2 previous videos, in furniture building.
There you go. Very good. Have you?
I'm up to furniture building, but
Are you going to build
No
a chair to
channel.
rival Ian's?
yeah.
Yeah.
um,
Any chair with that branding on is fine. Doesn't have to be a real one. You just gotta
not
get a
building
sticker of the
chairs
brand.
yet.
Yeah, they're quite
If you do, build them out of apple boxes so they'll be very stylish.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. All right then. So
Yeah.
with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Look after yourselves everywhere, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Completely failing with English. I'm tired. We'll see you again next week, 2100 GMT. Richard, thanks very much for joining and taking our flack as ever. Cheers for now, everyone. Bye bye.